Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Welcome to the video on how to write down the lab report for experiment 1 determination of the formula unit of a compound. Okay, by now you have done the experiment 1. So in this video we're going to learn on how to write it in a lab report. Okay, but before anything, let's have a look at our laboratory manual for the experiment itself or the practical session. Okay, so first here it mentioned for the preparation of experiment, first is pre-lab session. This is before you enter the lab session itself. What you need to do is to read and understand the objective and the theory of the experiment, and then think and plan the working procedure properly for the whole experiment. So that's why I have given you the link for the YouTube channel of Cracks Like MPP, where you can see the lecturer have done the jotter or the steps on how to plan or how to do the experiment 1. Okay, and then make sure before you enter the lab, you have appropriate table for the data. And last but not least is to complete and submit the pre-lab question provided. This one, I haven't asked you to do so lah. Okay, so that is the thing that you have to do before you enter the lab session. Okay, next, during the lab session itself, what you need to do is to check the apparatus provided, conduct the experiment carefully, record all the measurements and observation, and last but not least, you have to keep your work area clean and tidy. Okay, and last one is your post-lab session. Okay, this is once you have finished your experiment. Okay, next is actually what you have to do you have to explain what has been carried out and discuss the findings of the experiment. So in your lab report, what you need to include to discuss the finding is actually first is your objective, then is your theory, procedure, results or observation, discussion, and as well as the conclusion. So this is actually this video we're going to discuss into detail. We're going to look further into each of the subtopic itself lah. Okay. So let's look for our experiment 1. Okay, so for experiment 1 itself, in your lab manual, this is what have been given to you: the objective, the introduction, the apparatus and chemical reagents, and then your procedure, and last but not least is your data sheet where the table itself lah. You have to write it down to record all the data during the experiment itself. Okay, so how to write down the lab report itself? So in the lab report itself, what you need to have is your objective, theory, procedure, etc. But before that, before you start writing down the content of the lab report, what you need to have in the lab report itself must have your name, metric number, class, as well as the title of the experiment. Okay. So next, what you need to have is the objective, where it must be stated clearly. So for the objective itself, actually where do we get it? For the objective, it is actually based upon the lab manual itself. So here, on your left hand side here, it mentioned that the objective is to synthesize a zinc chloride compound and to determine the formula unit of a zinc chloride. Okay, so from here, you have to write down, instead of write down all of this, okay, you have to write down to synthesize zinc chloride. So maknanya as if at the start here you write down here to synthesize zinc chloride compound and to determine the formula unit of a zinc chloride. So that is the thing that you need to change lah when you write down the objective. Okay, once you have written down the objective, next you have to do the theory. Okay, where do you get the theory? The theory is actually from the introduction part of your lab manual. So based on the lab manual itself, we have here 2 paragraphs of our introduction, right? So from this one, you just need to write down all of it into your theory. You don't have to change anything. Okay. Next is straight away into your procedure. So when it mentioned about procedure, do we need to write down the apparatus and the chemical reagent? So there's no need lah. Okay, again, for the apparatus and the chemical reagent, there's no need for you to write it down. Again, why? Based upon the format itself, straight objective, theory, procedure. There's no of your apparatus and chemical reagent. So we're gonna go straight to the procedure. For the procedure itself, here it mentioned that you have to write down in passive sentences about all the steps taken during the experiment. So you have to change it into a passive sentences, and then you have to change it into a past tense because this is something that you have done in the past. Okay. So when we look based upon our procedure itself, we have at about 10 steps. Okay, so I have helped you for the first 5 procedure. Okay, but then, okay, so let's look. Okay, for example, what does it mean by changing it to passive sentences? Okay, so here, when we look at our procedure, here it mentioned that we have to weigh the crucible and record the exact mass. Okay, how to change it into a passive sentences? So here, we're going to write down the crucible was weighed. Okay, the crucible was weighed, and then don't forget, it's not only about the crucible, we have to mention about the exact mass is recorded. So here mentioned the exact mass was recorded. Again, it need to be changed into a passive sentences, and then we have to include was lah. Was, were, make sure it is a past sentences. Okay, next one, mention that for the second step, here it mentioned about when you look on your left hand side here, place approximately 0.25 gram of zinc powder into the crucible. Okay, and then determine the exact mass of zinc powder. Okay, so how to change it into a passive sentences? So here, we're going to change it into 0.25 gram of zinc powder was approximately placed, and the exact mass of zinc was determined. Okay, again, you have to change it into a passive sentences and a past tense. Okay, the third one, you mentioned that carefully add in 10 ml of 6 molar HCl solution into the crucible containing the zinc powder and stir gently with a glass rod. A vigorous chemical reaction will occur and hydrogen gas will be released. Okay, so for this one, we're just gonna, because procedure is actually about our steps on how to do the experiment, so we're gonna write down until this part only. Okay, so I've changed it into passive sentences. So how to change it? Okay, 10 ml of 6 molar HCl was carefully added into the crucible containing the zinc powder and was gently stirred with a glass rod. Okay, so step number 4 here. Okay, so for number 4 and 5, I help you a bit because the sentences is quite long. So I have simplified it for you and then I've changed it. Okay, so again, as you can see, if we compare it, it's different where I have changed it into past tense. Okay, and then here mentioned that the 5 ml of 10 molar HCl was added at a time until all the zinc has dissolved. Number 5, the crucible was placed on a hot plate in the fume cupboard and the content was heated slowly. Okay, so the first 5 steps here, I have helped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6, 7, 8, 9. I believe you could try yourself lah. Okay, again, you must change it into past passive sentences and don't forget it to be past tense. Was added. Okay, so that is the examples. Okay, next one is the result. Okay, so the result is actually based upon the table that you have written down beforehand lah. This one, which is your mass of the empty crucible until mass of chlorine, and then make sure you include as well as the table for the calculation of the empirical formula of a zinc chloride. So this one you just copy and paste it into your result. Okay, and then don't forget at the end there you have to write down in sentences where the empirical formula for zinc chloride is what. Okay, so supposedly it must the empirical formula for zinc chloride is ZnCl2. So this equation is actually for the reaction between our zinc solid and the HCl. Okay, so from here you can see the theoretical value or the theoretical formula for zinc chloride is ZnCl2. Okay, so after you have finished write down the result. Okay, make sure dekat result ni we have to write down this one all over again lah. This one if you don't want to write down in a table it's fine, but then kalau for the empirical formula calculation, you need to draw it in terms of a table lah. Our Marmora ni. Marmora. Okay. Okay, next one is our discussion. For the discussion, we have to discuss the possible error and the precaution during the experiment itself. Okay, so contohnya possible error ni you have found one possible error. So dekat precaution tu it actually what you have to do to overcome the possible error or problems that you may encounter during the experiment itself. Okay, so for the possible error itself, it's actually I get it from the procedure itself. So let's have a look how we're going to find out the possible error and the problems. Okay, so the first one, the possible error. Since here it mentioned in the procedure itself, weigh the crucible and record the exact mass. Okay, and then yang itu maybe we do not encounter any problem. Okay, second one, place approximately 0.25 gram of zinc powder. So maybe our zinc powder was not weighed correctly. Okay, so the possible error is that the zinc powder was not weighed accurately. Okay, so that is our first possible error. So when this is our possible error, what is our precaution? So we have to weigh it near to the zinc powder is weighed nearest to 0.25 gram because that is actually what the procedure want. 0.25 gram of zinc powder. Okay, so next it mentioned that here carefully add in 10 ml of HCl of 6 molar HCl and then stir it gently with a glass rod. Okay, and then here it mentioned for the number 4 here, if the zinc powder does not dissolve completely, continue adding the acid 5 ml at a time. But then remember that the amount of acid to be used must not exceed 20 ml. So this is one of the problems that you may encounter. Okay, so where a successive HCl solution, maknanya you have added extra HCl solution, was added to the zinc powder. Okay, so what is the precaution? This is the precaution. The H solution added must not exceed 20 ml. Sebab dekat sini kata must not exceed 20 ml. From the procedure itself lah. Yeah, must not exceed 20 ml. Okay, apa lagi? Next step is actually, the heating process. Okay, heat the compound gently until number 6 here. Heat the compound gently until it is completely dry and then remove the crucible immediately to avoid the compound from melting. Okay, so that's maybe the possible error that you may encounter. Ni tak semestinya kamu memang tak semestinya apa yang kamu lalui je, macam possible pun boleh. Walaupun tak ada masalah ni, but what may be the possible error that you encounter tu, you have to write down lah. So here dia kata nak avoid melting kan. So our possible error here is that the compound melts during the heating process. Okay, so how to avoid it? Remove the crucible immediately from hot plate. Kat sini lah. This is actually, all of this I get straight away from my procedure itself. Dekat sini contohnya, here. Dia kata, remove, number 6 ni, remove the crucible from hot plate immediately to avoid melting. Okay, and then next possible error is here it mentioned that to cover the crucible and allow it to cool to room temperature. Maybe when you do the cooling process, you didn't cover it with the lid. So the possible error here is that the crucible was not covered during the cooling process. Our precaution is to cover the crucible during the cooling process itself. And last but not least, based on our procedure here number 8, it mentioned that let it cool to room temperature. Number 8 here, let it cool to room temperature and then weigh it again. Okay, so dekat sini actually it wanted the compound to be cool, then you can weigh it. But then the possible error that you may encounter or the possible error that you may have done during the experiment is that the compound itself was weighed while it was still hot. Okay, so the possible or the precaution is to weigh the compound once it is cooled to the room temperature. So again, for the possible error and problems ni, it's actually you can get it from the procedure itself lah. Okay, remember the possible error tu is not only the one that you have done, tapi semua yang maybe possible error that you can encounter. Okay, and last but not least, once you have write down the discussion, is the conclusion. Okay, so for the conclusion itself, it is actually you have to answer back what is your objective. Okay, you have to answer it back. So in this experiment, we have two objectives. One is to synthesize a zinc chloride compound. To synthesize ni maknanya you are able to make a zinc chloride compound lah. Maknanya kamu dah berjaya kan at the end of the experiment. Memang kamu dapat satu solid ni, zinc chloride. Okay, next is actually to determine the formula unit of a zinc chloride compound. Okay, once you have synthesized the zinc chloride, then you are able to determine the formula unit lah. To determine the formula unit we use our empirical formula calculation. Okay, so kali ni kita kena bagi tahu lah. Here it mentioned that to determine the formula unit of a zinc chloride compound, so we have to be more specific. Dekat conclusion tu bukan sahaja kita jawab the formula unit of zinc chloride was determined, we have to mention specifically what is the formula unit of your zinc chloride compound. Okay, so dekat sini kita tulis lah. So, the empirical formula, or you want to write down the formula unit pun it's fine. The formula unit for zinc chloride compound is, what do you get? Theoretically, you should get zinc Cl2. But then if you get zinc Cl3 ke, zinc Cl4 ke, just write it down lah. Because this is based upon your result. So it's fine. Okay? So that is at the end of how to write down the lab report for experiment 1 SK015.